What happens when a legendary actor's ego collides with a talk show host's refusal to back down? It only took 37 seconds for Robert De Niro to completely lose control on live television, turning what should have been a simple interview into an explosive meltdown that shocked viewers across the nation. The studio lights were blazing bright as Bill Maher adjusted his tie and glanced at his notes one final time. Tonight's guest was supposed to be a ratings goldmine. Robert De Niro, the Hollywood icon, was scheduled to discuss his latest film project. What nobody expected was the verbal warfare that was about to unfold. De Niro walked onto the set with his usual swagger, but there was something different in his eyes tonight. A tension that seemed to ripple through the air as he settled into the guest chair. The audience applauded enthusiastically, completely unaware that they were about to witness one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history. Bill started with his trademark smile, the kind that had charmed audiences for years. He was known for asking tough questions, but he always did it with a certain finesse that kept his guests comfortable while still getting the content his viewers craved. "Robert, great to have you back on the show," Bill said, his voice warm and welcoming. "I know our audience is excited to hear about your new project, but first, I have to ask about some of the comments you made last week about the current political climate. You seemed pretty fired up." De Niro's face immediately hardened. The friendly mask he had worn during his entrance completely disappeared. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms, a defensive posture that anyone could read from the cheap seats. "I said what I said," De Niro replied, his voice already carrying an edge that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I'm not here to talk politics with you, Bill. I'm here to promote my movie." The response caught Bill off guard, but he was a professional. He had dealt with difficult guests before, and he knew how to navigate tricky waters. His smile never wavered as he tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Of course, Bill said, nodding understandingly. "I totally get that. But you know, when public figures make strong statements, people are naturally curious about the reasoning behind them. It's not about taking sides. It's about having a conversation." That was the wrong thing to say. De Niro's eyes flashed with something that looked dangerously close to rage. He uncrossed his arms and leaned forward, pointing a finger directly at Bill's chest. "You want a conversation?" De Niro snapped, his famous voice now dripping with contempt. "Here's your conversation. You media people think you can just poke and prod at us like we're your personal entertainment monkeys. Well, I'm not dancing for you tonight." The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze as they realized they were capturing something unprecedented. Bill, to his credit, maintained his composure. He had built his career on staying calm under pressure, and this was the ultimate test. "Robert, I think there might be a misunderstanding here," Bill said, his voice steady and reasonable. "I'm not trying to make you dance for anyone. I just thought we could have an honest discussion about issues that matter to people." "Honest discussion?" De Niro laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the kind of laugh that made everyone in the room deeply uncomfortable. "You wouldn't know an honest discussion if it bit you in the face. You're just another talking head trying to get ratings off my name." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Bill's producer was frantically making hand signals from behind the cameras, clearly trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. But Bill wasn't ready to throw in the towel. He had weathered storms before, and he wasn't about to let one guest derail his show. "I respect your right to feel that way," Bill responded, his voice still calm but with a hint of steel underneath. "But I think you're being unfair. I've had you on this show multiple times and I've always treated you with respect. I'm not sure why tonight feels different." That question seemed to push De Niro over an invisible line. He stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward from the force. The sudden movement made several audience members gasp audibly. "You want to know why tonight feels different?" De Niro shouted, his voice echoing through the studio. "Because I'm sick of people like you pretending to be journalists when you're really just gossip merchants in expensive suits." The personal attack hit its mark, but Bill refused to take the bait. Instead of getting defensive or firing back with his own insults, he remained seated and kept his voice level. "I understand you're upset," Bill said, looking up at De Niro, who was now looming over him like a storm cloud. "But calling names isn't going to solve anything. Why don't you sit back down, and we can talk about whatever's really bothering you?" The offer of peace seemed to infuriate De Niro even more. He began pacing behind his chair like a caged animal, his hands gesturing wildly as he spoke. "What's bothering me is that you people think you can just ambush guests with your gotcha questions and then act all innocent when we push back. You knew exactly what you were doing when you brought up those comments. This whole thing is a setup." Bill shook his head slowly, genuinely confused by the accusation. He glanced at his notes, wondering if he had somehow missed a crucial piece of information about his guest's state of mind. "Robert, I promise you this isn't a setup, Bill said, his sincerity evident in every word. I asked a simple question about something you said publicly. If you don't want to discuss it, that's completely fine. We can move on to talking about your film. That's why you're here, right? But De Niro wasn't interested in moving on. The veteran actor seemed determined to turn the interview into a battleground, and Bill was quickly running out of diplomatic options. De Niro stopped pacing and turned to face Bill directly, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. The famous actor had clearly decided that diplomacy was off the table. You know what your problem is, Maher? De Niro said, spitting out the name like it tasted bitter. You think you're so much smarter than everyone else. You sit behind that desk with your smug little grin and act like you're doing the world a favor by existing. The attack was personal and brutal, but Bill absorbed it without flinching. He had been in show business long enough to know that sometimes people lash out when they're feeling cornered or defensive. His job was to keep the show moving forward, not to engage in a mudslinging contest. I'm sorry you feel that way, Bill replied, his tone remaining professional despite the provocation. But I think maybe we should take a step back here. You're obviously dealing with something that's got you worked up, and that's okay. We all have bad days. The attempt at understanding seemed to make De Niro even angrier. He slammed his hand down on the desk between them, causing Bill's coffee mug to jump and spill across his notes. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me, De Niro roared. I don't need your fake sympathy or your condescending little speeches about bad days. What I need is for you to show some basic human decency instead of treating your guests like circus animals. Bill calmly reached for some tissues to clean up the spilled coffee, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The gesture seemed to emphasize just how out of control De Niro was becoming, in contrast to his host's steady demeanor. Robert, I genuinely don't understand where this is coming from, Bill said as he dabbed at the coffee stains. I've interviewed thousands of people over the years, and I've always tried to treat everyone with respect. If I've somehow offended you, I apologize, but I honestly don't know what I did wrong. The sincere apology seemed to catch De Niro off guard for a moment. He stood there breathing heavily, looking like he was trying to decide whether to accept the olive branch or reject it completely. Unfortunately for everyone involved, he chose rejection. You want to know what you did wrong? De Niro said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow felt more threatening than his shouting. You invited me here under false pretenses. You told my people this would be about my new film, but you had your little political ambush all planned out from the beginning. Bill set down the tissues and looked directly at De Niro, his expression earnest and open. Anyone watching could see that he was genuinely trying to communicate with his increasingly unstable guest. I swear to you, there was no ambush planned, Bill said slowly and clearly. Yes, I was curious about your recent comments because they made news, but that doesn't make it a setup. It makes it current events. If you want to skip that topic entirely, we can do that right now. But De Niro was beyond reason at this point. He began gesticulating wildly, his voice rising to a level that made the sound engineers scramble to adjust their equipment. Current events, De Niro screamed, his face turning red with rage. That's what you people always say when you want to justify your gotcha journalism. Well, here's some current events for you. I think you're a hack who built his career on tearing down people better than him. The insult was so over the line that even some of the audience members began to boo softly. Bill's staff looked mortified, and his producer was making frantic cutting motions with his hands. But Bill waved him off. He wasn't ready to give up on salvaging this disaster. I'm going to ignore the personal attacks because I think you're upset about something that has nothing to do with me, Bill said, his voice remaining steady despite the provocation. But I do want to address the accusation about gotcha journalism. I asked you one question about something you said publicly. That's not an ambush. That's an interview. De Niro whirled around to face the audience, spreading his arms wide like he was addressing a crowd at a political rally. His behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, and several audience members looked genuinely concerned for their safety. Do you people see this? De Niro shouted at the confused audience. This is exactly what I'm talking about. He asks a loaded question. I call him out on it, and then he acts like the victim. This is media manipulation at its finest. The audience didn't know how to respond. Some people clapped uncertainly, while others just sat in stunned silence. Bill realized that the situation was spiraling completely out of control, and he needed to try a different approach. Robert, please sit down, Bill said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been managing live television for decades. You're scaring the audience, and frankly, you're embarrassing yourself. Whatever's going on with you tonight, this isn't the way to handle it. The direct confrontation seemed to snap something inside De Niro's head. He spun around to face Bill, his eyes wide with what looked like genuine shock that someone had dared to challenge his behavior. "Did you just tell me I'm embarrassing myself?" De Niro asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Did you actually just say that to me on your little television show?" Bill nodded without hesitation, meeting De Niro's glare with steady confidence. He had reached the point where being diplomatic was no longer an option. Sometimes, when dealing with someone who was completely out of line, the only solution was to be direct. "Yes, I did," Bill said calmly. "Because you are embarrassing yourself. You came on my show as a guest and you've spent the last 10 minutes insulting me, making wild accusations, and putting on a display that would make a toddler having a tantrum look mature by comparison." The words hit De Niro like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. For a moment, it looked like he might actually calm down and recognize how badly he was behaving. Instead, he exploded with a fury that surpassed anything he had shown so far. "How dare you!" De Niro screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at Bill's face. "How dare you sit there in your little kingdom and lecture me about maturity? You're nothing but a second-rate comedian who thinks having a television show makes him important." The attack was vicious and personal, but Bill didn't even blink. He had been in the entertainment business long enough to develop thick skin, and he recognized De Niro's behavior for what it was, a desperate attempt to regain control of a situation that had gotten away from him. "You're right about one thing," Bill said with a slight smile that seemed to infuriate De Niro even more. "I am just a comedian with a television show, but at least I know how to behave like a professional when I'm working." That final comment about professionalism was the match that lit the fuse. De Niro's face went from red to purple, and his entire body began shaking with rage. The veteran actor looked like he was about to have a complete meltdown on live television. "Professional?" De Niro shrieked, his voice cracking from the strain. "You want to talk about being professional? A professional doesn't ambush his guests with political hit jobs disguised as interviews." Bill leaned back in his chair, his calm demeanor now serving as a stark contrast to De Niro's complete loss of control. The host's composure seemed to make his guest even more furious, creating a feedback loop of escalating insanity. "Robert, I asked you one simple question about something you said publicly," Bill replied, his voice steady and reasonable. "If that counts as an ambush in your mind, then maybe you shouldn't be giving public interviews at all." The suggestion seemed to push De Niro past his breaking point. He began pacing again, but this time his movements were more aggressive, more threatening. Several security guards moved closer to the stage, clearly concerned about where this was heading. "Don't tell me what I should or shouldn't be doing," De Niro screamed, whirling around to face Bill with wild eyes. "You're nobody. You're a failed comedian who lucked into a television show, and now you think you can lecture actual artists about how to conduct themselves." The insults were getting more desperate and more personal, but Bill refused to take the bait. He had seen enough meltdowns over the years to recognize the pattern. De Niro was spiraling, and the best thing Bill could do was remain calm and let his guest destroy his own credibility. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Bill said simply. "But calling me names isn't going to change the fact that you're the one who's acting inappropriately here. My audience deserves better than this, and honestly, so do you." De Niro stopped pacing and stared at Bill with a look of pure hatred. The mention of the audience seemed to remind him that hundreds of people were watching his breakdown, and instead of feeling embarrassed, he seemed to feel even more victimized. "Your audience?" De Niro laughed bitterly. "Your audience is here to see me, not you. Without guests like me, you'd be doing weekend gigs at comedy clubs in New Jersey." The attack on his career and his audience was designed to hurt, but Bill just shrugged it off with the easy confidence of someone who knew his own worth. "Maybe you're right," Bill said with a slight smile. "But at least I'd be doing those gigs without having public meltdowns and screaming at people who are just trying to do their jobs." That comment sent De Niro completely over the edge. He grabbed his chair, and for a moment it looked like he might actually throw it. The audience gasped, and several people in the front row instinctively ducked. "That's it!" De Niro roared, his voice echoing through the studio. "I'm done with this garbage. I'm done with you, I'm done with your stupid show, and I'm done pretending to be polite to people who don't deserve basic human respect." Bill watched calmly as De Niro continued his tirade, making no move to interrupt or escalate the situation further. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best response to someone having a breakdown was to simply let them finish destroying themselves. "You know what your real problem is, Maher?" De Niro continued, pointing an accusatory finger. "You're jealous. You're jealous because I'm a real artist, and you're just a talking head who makes jokes for a living." The accusation was so absurd that Bill couldn't help but chuckle softly, which seemed to infuriate De Niro even more. "You think this is funny?" De Niro screamed. "You think destroying people's reputations for entertainment is some kind of joke?" Bill shook his head slowly, his expression becoming more serious. He realized that De Niro was completely disconnected from reality at this point, but he still felt obligated to try one last time to reach him. "Robert, nobody's trying to destroy your reputation except you," Bill said quietly. "I asked you a simple question. You exploded, and now you're having a complete meltdown on live television. I'm not the one making you look bad here." The truth of that statement seemed to hit De Niro like a physical blow. For just a moment, his face showed a flicker of self-awareness, as if he suddenly realized how he must look to the people watching at home. But instead of using that moment of clarity to apologize and try to salvage the situation, De Niro doubled down on his anger. "You set me up," he shouted, his voice now hoarse from all the screaming. "This whole thing was planned from the beginning. You brought me here to make me look crazy." Bill sighed and looked directly into the camera, addressing his audience with the kind of straightforward honesty that had made him a trusted voice for millions of viewers. "Folks, I want you to know that this was not planned," he said calmly. "Robert came here tonight to talk about his new movie. I asked him one question about current events, and this is how he chose to respond. This is not entertainment. This is just sad." The direct appeal to the audience was the final straw for De Niro. He began shouting incoherently, his words becoming harder to understand as his rage consumed whatever rational thought he had left. "You can't do this to me," De Niro screamed, his face now dripping with sweat. "I'm Robert De Niro. I don't have to take this from some nobody talk show host." Bill had finally had enough. He stood up from his desk, his movement causing De Niro to take a step backward. When Bill spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had reached the absolute limit of his patience. "You're right. You don't have to take anything from me," Bill said firmly, "because you're done here. Security, please escort Mr. De Niro off the stage." The words seemed to shock De Niro into momentary silence. He looked around the studio as if seeing it for the first time, his eyes wide with disbelief that someone had actually dared to kick him off a television show. "You can't throw me off," De Niro sputtered as security guards approached. "I'm the guest. People came here to see me." Bill remained standing, his posture calm but resolute. He had made his decision, and he wasn't going to back down now. "People came here to see an interview, not a temper tantrum," Bill replied. "And since you seem incapable of having a civilized conversation, we're done." As security gently but firmly guided De Niro toward the exit, the disgraced actor continued shouting over his shoulder. "This isn't over, Maher," De Niro yelled as he was escorted away. "Everyone's going to know what kind of person you really are. This is character assassination." Bill watched him go without saying another word, then turned back to face his audience and cameras. His expression was professional, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes, as if he genuinely regretted that things had gone so badly. "Well, folks," Bill said, adjusting his tie and sitting back down at his desk, "that's not exactly how we plan to spend the evening, but sometimes that's live television for you." The audience erupted in applause, clearly appreciating how their host had handled an impossible situation with grace and professionalism. Bill smiled and waved, but his expression remained somewhat somber. "We're going to take a quick break," Bill announced, "and when we come back, we'll try to end this show on a more positive note. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for understanding that sometimes, even in show business, you have to draw the line somewhere."